So we should be live, everybody, and for those of you that are watching, if you found your way to the Webdirexion Social Strategies broadcast, I want to thank you for that. And this week it'll be on content marketing and social media. Is that the new PR? We have our social media experts standing by, and we also have 2 more sessions in July and August, which you can register for at the webdirexion.com site. And today, for those of you listening, you ask a good question. Our stream team is standing by, and they'll pick the best questions asked, and you could win a book on B2B social media marketing. You could also win a free content marketing course or social media marketing course that are given online. I'll tell you who our panel of experts standing by are. Carri Bugbee, I think she's joining us real soon. She's an internationally recognized expert in social media marketing with 22 years plus experience in traditional public relations and advertising. She taught social media marketing at Portland State University for over 2 years and founded the Portland chapter of the Social Media Club. She also won a Shorty Award in the advertising category for tweeting as Peggy Olson of Mad Men. Love that show. I want to ask her about that when she comes on. Lori Weaver is with us from Lexington Business Media. She's the owner-principal of Lexington Business Media out of Lexington, Kentucky. She specializes in online PR, media relations, and content, including writing, editing, optimization, and marketing for a broad slate of industries, including healthcare, business, finance, energy, green living, agriculture, and advocacy, and also is a writer on about.com. We'll ask her exactly where you can find that page when we talk with her. And last but not least, Pilar Portella from BusinessWire. She is the media relations supervisor and LatinoWire media representative responsible for managing media relations specialists in the West Coast region. Also, she's in charge of developing, maintaining, and expanding relationships with the Southeast and ethnic media, especially LatinoWire. There's a little, on all of them, there were some secondary logos. I just call your attention that BusinessWire has a listen and measure service that maybe we'll be able to learn a little bit more about. With that, we'll go live and have our discussion. Good. Sometimes we have technical difficulties and it bumps me when I come back from showing the slides, but we're all live now. And let's start with a tip. It will go over to my left. Carri, a tip for us on public relations, social media, the new PR.
Oh, anything specific related to that? Just like a general overall tip?
Yeah, something that you may have thought was that you liked recently or something that you like doing.
Well, I guess I'm surprised that in 2013 that there are still PR folks who don't realize that one of the best ways to reach out to journalists might be through Twitter or other, social media tools. I was at a BusinessWire function recently in Portland, and one of the journalists mentioned that, and I was thinking, yeah, of course, but there were a lot of people there who were like, wow, we can do that. So
they didn't even realize it.
Yeah, exactly. So it seemed obvious to me, but maybe not to everyone.
All right, so now when you were tweeting as Peggy Olson, were you tweeting for the actress, or were you just kind of assisting and kind of set up the account yourself?
Well, so the Peggy Olson story is kind of a long and convoluted one. I was not tweeting for the actress. It was a fan fiction thing that I took on in 2008, almost 5 years ago now. But the reason I did it wasn't because I was a super fan, which isn't to say I'm not a fan of the show. I'm a big fan of Mad Men, obviously. I think all marketers watch Mad Men, or just about. But I did it because at that time period, people were still saying things like, oh, businesses shouldn't use Twitter, brands shouldn't be on Twitter, it should just be for people, it should just be for real people, not fake people, having conversations. And I always thought that that was silly. Like, I always thought that it was going to be a great tool for marketing. And so I looked at that as an opportunity to push the envelope and, figure out how could you market something in a more fun, creative way that's just not, pounding people over the head with, buy our stuff or watch our show or whatever.
Huh. Well, that's interesting. Maybe we'll get to meet Elizabeth Moss. I think that's the actress sometime.
Yes.
So let's go to Lori Weaver from Lexington Business Media, and a tip that you've noticed, thought it would be good, Lori.
Sure. I think one of the things that comes to mind is that when I worked more in traditional media relations and public relations, I used to counsel businesses not to rely so much on press releases without building the relationship along with it, and cautioning them that if they're only contacting a media person when they want to splash their company name about, they're not going to have as good a results as if they build that relationship, they provide leads to stories that don't, lead directly back to their brand, etc. I think that there's a bit of a parallel in social media today, where sometimes we have companies that have a tendency to do the same thing, where they're posting things only about their own company, go to our website or, this and that. Even if it's fairly good content, it's also important to have that balance of posting other material that's relevant to your industry or what you want to talk about, and share interesting content that may not drive people back to your site necessarily, but it does help to build your brand, and it helps to set you up as that authoritative voice, which is the goal. So I guess to sum it up, looking at the balance that's necessary, it has been necessary all along in media relations and public relations. It's also necessary in social media.
Thanks for that. That's good counsel, and appreciated. So we'll go to Pilar Portella with BusinessWire. I bet you, Pilar joins us all the way from Florida, I think.
Yes.
And she's on a phone. She's bravely joining us on these Hangouts from her phone. And we welcome you. And you're from BusinessWire. I bet you see a lot of different kinds of public relations things going on. And so a tip that from your end.
I actually have two tips. I find that in the busy world that we live in, it helps to have a mix of old school and new school communications practices. I not only use social media to pitch and to promote my projects, but I also do, follow-up calls and emails to the media and to PR professionals. And I just find that it's not just a one or the other, but it's both. Another bit of advice I would say is to really know when you're out there, really know who you are by doing some soul searching when you're trying to develop yourself and to build your brand, your own brand, and to know your audience. That is so important. I find that sometimes people are just sending out there, but they really don't know who their true audience is, and also really keeping up with the times. Just dabble a little bit in everything, and like Google Hangout, for instance, test everything out, and I think if you do that, you should be okay.
Well, thank you, Pilar, and thank all of you again for attending. And I just realized that I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Scott Frangos with Webdirexion. We're an online marketing agency, and we have some clients that do press releases and do PR, and they do social media, and they do content marketing, and we're trying to help them as all of us are coming up to speed on all the new tools and tactics. So, hey, I had a question from one of our clients yesterday, and I want to work that one in and see maybe I'll go back to Pilar on this, and then I have a couple other questions for the panel. aside from a standard announcement style press release, this is just happened, or we've just landed an account with so and so, what other angles or spin do you think are successful? I'll ask you, Pilar, since you see a lot of different companies, but I know you all have clients too. So if Carri and Lori have some thoughts, that'll be good too.
So you're asking me spin to market the story?
Yeah, the client's question was, well, I know to put together a standard press release that says we just installed our software at such and such a company, and just kind of an announcement, but should there be other styles or pitches or feature angles, different angles, maybe it would be the better way to put it?
It's funny. When I go to different professional public relations organizations, and we have journalists on the panel, everyone has a different way of what appeals to them, a different style. I would just say, when you're pitching or you're putting a release out there, it all depends on the headline. What is an appealing headline, and also the headline that kind of gives a snippet of what your story is about. That it identifies what your product or service is about, and it also is, in a sense, it's also highlighting and appealing. It's going to draw them in, and to want to open up what it is that you're trying to sell or promote for your client.
Whatever you can best draw them in with.
Exactly, and not too long. And even I've seen some clients that they'll even have, like, nowadays they'll have their Twitter hashtag on there. They'll have just something that will appeal to to who it is that you're trying to reach out to and to promote what it is that you want to do, something that's going to draw them in. If it's too long, or if it's just a boring, or it's been done, it's not going to bring them in. And it just depends too on the news day. If it's a busy news day, unfortunately, it's not going to get the coverage that you want. But if it's a good story with a good, strong headline, and you have the essentials that you need in it, it's going to get good coverage, I believe.
Well, that sounds like good advice, and thank you for it. And that kind of leads into the first question for the panel. But just a reminder for those that are watching live, Pilar mentioned hashtags, and ours is WEBDX Social for Webdirexion Social, and you can post a question for the panel if you're watching live on either Twitter or Google+, and even if you're on Facebook. They're using hashtags now, and one of our stream team from Webdirexion, that'd be Wendy, Julie, or Danette, will see it and will make sure it gets asked. Given the time constraints, we have about another 40 minutes or so. And so maybe that's a good carryover to the first question we all knew we wanted to talk about. How do you define public relations in today's environment? Offline and online, and we all know we want to use Twitter more, but what about offline press releases and maybe follow-up phone calls? And so I'll go from left to right, and I'm thinking it's the same on everybody's screen. That would mean I start with Carri at Big Deal PR. How do you define public relations in today's environment, Carri?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think lots of people, especially clients, probably less so people who actually work in the profession, but certainly clients still have this old school notion of what PR is. They think, you write a press release and the journalist is just sitting at their computer waiting for your press release, right? And then they're going to get it and go, oh, wow, okay, let me write about that. And now that, so many journalists have been laid off, there's a lot of turnover. Their journalists are spread thin. They might cover a whole lot of beats. I mean, I think that's changed a lot. So that's one factor. And then the other factor is you know, for the first time, well, it's been a few years now, but for the first time in my career, you know, public relations is actually now public. So I used to tell clients years ago that public relations was such a misnomer, because unless you were writing a speech, you were probably never ever dealing with the public. It was all about press relations, because, you know, your message had to be filtered through whatever a journalist was willing to pick up and write about, and, you know, and put their own angle to it. But now you can actually take your message straight to your audiences, your constituents, and there's a whole realm of ways to do it. And, you know, I think to the title of this event, a lot of what PR people do now is content marketing. You know, so whether that's blogging or using other social tools, or just creating content that is interesting or useful or educational, depending on what kind of business you're working with. I think that it really is public. And I also think that every marketer, whether you work in PR or SEO or advertising, should probably stop thinking about themselves in one of those silos, because all that stuff overlaps now. So, you know, I don't personally feel like it's going to be possible to be a PR person 5 years from now and not understand, or maybe even 2 years from now, and not understand SEO, you know, or not understand, you know, conversion metrics, or the kind of things that typically PR people haven't had to concern themselves with. And PR people ought to be buying ads. You know, they ought to be buying social ads, and traditionally PR agencies haven't handled any sort of media buys. And I think that's all converging and mashing up now.
A lot of change and disruption there. Yes. And, you know, your answer, we had a couple of things we wanted to cover in general, and your answer touched on both of them, you know, defining public relations, and then I think the fact that you said now for the first time it's public, it kind of ties into a related question, which is, what about, do we bypass traditional media? And I'll go to Lori, and you can kind of weave those two a little bit. Boy, no pun intended, but she is Lori Weaver. And
that's nice, isn't he?
So how would you define modern public relations? Do you think, you know, what was interesting in listening is, when do you bypass traditional media, and when do you go to them first?
You've got mail, Danette.
Well, one of the things that I was going to mention when you posed the earlier question was that, and this is related to the tip I had earlier, is that public relations is all about relationship building, and it always has been, but the new media, social media, in a lot of ways makes it easier than it was to establish those relationships, because there are more avenues to do so. The biggest, I think, hurdle that some folks have to get past is that they still need to embrace the new media in addition to traditional media. And I think when we first started to really see a lot of folks online blogging some really good content, the thing that I kept running up against was that you know, they weren't taken seriously even by fellow journalists, who in some ways resented that that they had to you know, also speak to people who they didn't consider journalists. But now we see traditional journalists kind of embracing the whole idea of blogging and establishing some really good following. That's not as much of a problem as far as you know, kind of ignoring new media, but it also comes back to, you know, it can swing the other way, and there needs to be some tie-in with, you know, we were talking earlier about how to tie in, you know, how to get your media release posted or looked at anyway. And one of the things you can do, of course, is to tie in with a news item of the day when possible. So that's, you know, one thing that you can do as far as tying that in. But I guess when I think about the new PR and how we look at it, it's again comes down to establishing those relationships and using the balance, the mix of both traditional and new media.
Yeah, that's good advice. And it's kind of sound. And I noticed that Pilar's getting bounced in and out from her phone in this. Hey, Pilar, we'll try to get to you. I saw you bounce. Thanks for coming back in and sticking with it. We're kind of mixing and weaving the two questions we had thought about initially together, because the definition of public relation in today's environment might sometimes mean you bypass traditional media because you can go direct to your public, as Carri said. So, but what I'm wondering is, what would your thoughts be on, and if Pilar, if you get bumped up, we'll go to the other panelists, but
okay.
What would you think about, would you ever want to go to the traditional media first before, and then call them and alert them before you go to Twitter, or how would you coordinate that up? Or any thoughts on that?
I think it needs to be simultaneous, just to be fair. And it depends on the company that you are. You can't just solely go and contact one media person, I think, depending on what it is that you're announcing, or solely go on Twitter. Because reliance on a single, for instance, a third-party social media channel for like a disclosure, a very important thing that you're trying to send out, it has its obvious risk. For instance, just a good example of that, when BusinessWire issued the release announcing Steve Jobs had passed away, it caused a Twitter to crash. So that's something that you have to, really take into consideration and think about. So, and also, it depends on your reach. So let's say, for instance, you're making an announcement on your Facebook and it's your friends and family. What use is that going to be? So you really need to make sure you're reaching the correct person, the community. You're sending it out to the right people, and it's going to the right hands. Also, you may have some media folks that may want exclusives. It depends on what you're doing and really who you're reaching out to. If you're a public company, you really need to look at fair disclosure and full, fair, and simultaneous distribution. You need to take those into consideration. If you're a small company, then those rules may not apply, but you need to make sure you're reaching the right audience and it's going to the right hands.
I think that brings up another point. We'll go back to Carri and see what she thinks about this. But targeting the right audience. So you're thinking. Well, I think we may all be thinking simultaneous. But both Google Plus and Twitter let you create. Well, on Google Plus you can have circles that you go to a specific circle, and on Twitter you could have a list, I suppose. So Carri, reaching the right audience, and would you agree that we should go simultaneous with Twitter and with a press release, and then how would you make sure you reach the right audience?
Well, I think it all depends on the announcement. Sometimes you're going, and it depends on the size of your company and what sort of relationships you already have with the press. In some cases, you're probably going to send information out embargoed, if you have some press relationships that will honor that. And, and in some cases, you might even give a scoop to a press source. As great as Twitter
strategy.
Is. Yeah, absolutely. As great as Twitter is, I'll take a story in the Wall Street Journal, or the New York Times or Business Week or something, over a tweet. Don't get me wrong, old media still has plenty of power and clout. I would not discount that at all. So I think it just depends. But I think there are lots of. The great thing about Twitter and other social media is that you can make way more frequent announcements. You can't pitch a story to a journalist every week. I mean, that's just, you know, they're going to get tired of hearing from you. You know, unless you're a great big multinational corporation that has a lot of really big news, and there are people who really cover your beat and want to, you know, want to write about you all the time. But those companies are few and far between. Most of us work for companies who, you know, would be lucky to get press, and so you have to be really judicious about how often you're going to pitch them. And so social media gives you a way to get the word out more frequently. And honestly, you need to get the word out frequently because it's all about content, right? So you've got to have some interesting content to engage people and let them know what's going on.
It's got to be interesting so they'll see it. And we during one of the stream team just posted a question that's kind of interrelated. They said, you know, there's hundreds of thousands of people on Twitter. So how do you make sure it gets seen? And maybe that goes to, and I'll come back to Pilar because I know she was tweeting about the event today. So would you have any formula or strategy or tactic? And I'll come back and see which each of you think after Pilar on, you know, how many times should you tweet it? Should you do it at different times of the day? Should you go to different lists? Should you try to get other people to help you tweet it? Any thoughts on that? I'll go to Pilar first, so before they bump her again.
I honestly, it all depends. It depends on your relationships, but I find you don't want to over-tweet. So you kind of have to. You want to kind of time your tweets, and you also it's very helpful to make sure that you're following the conversation. You have people following your conversation, joining you. It's making sure you're reaching the audience, the correct audience. I always make sure too that I put in correct @ symbols for hashtags and Twitter handles of people that you're working with, so they can also promote. Because for instance, our webinar, for example, I made sure that I was including the Webdirexion social hashtag. I also made sure I was including our BusinessWire handle, the other speakers. So that is very important when you're trying to promote sharing and also reacting properly. Just, you know, using also common sense and proper Twitter etiquette, I guess you can call it.
Thanks, Pilar. Yeah, so, you know, that point on the hashtags, I'm thinking people that are watching live are probably sophisticated to know what the hashtags are, but I want to thank you for mentioning that, you know, including more than one hashtag, because people will see this broadcast, will save it and make it available. So hashtags are what appears after the number sign if you're brand new and you're watching this later. Probably most people watching know this. But you use more than one and use a popular one so other people will see it. And with that, we'll go over to Lori and see if she has some thoughts on that. And I'm seeing in the stream again, people are asking that angle question again. Maybe you have another thought on that if you want to, Lori, on would you just write the who, what, where, when, and why, or do you try to do a different angle when you do a press release? Lori. Hey, you might be
Sorry
muted.
about that.
There you go. Yeah.
I was muted.
Yeah.
I actually think that it depends on who you're pitching the story to. In some cases, you may want to simply put in the facts if it's straight up company news, and that's the way to go. If you're trying to pitch to a blogger that has a good following in your industry, or somebody covering news, again, as I mentioned earlier, if there's a news tie-in. I recently did a mention for a client who has an SEO company, and what I did was I looked at some of search engine news and talked about Google competing with Bing and with Yahoo and what was going on with that and what their investors thought, but was able to then weave in a quote from my client because that's his area of specialty, and you know it worked very smoothly. Whereas if I would have done an article focusing only on him, probably would not have gotten the play it did. So that's I guess one example. You really, I think I don't know if it was Carri who said it earlier, but one of my colleagues here mentioned how you really need to look at targeting your audience and making sure that how you pitch or write a story really reflects what you think that they're going to be most interested in. So it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Well, that's a good segue. We'll go over to Carri too and see what her thoughts are, and I also want to see if you can name a mistake or a common mistake or a mistake that you notice that people tend to make, and we'll go to each of you on that too. And I think I see maybe your dog there, Lori. My two are in the studio and they're quiet right now. I'm happy about that. But Carri, your thoughts on the best strategy and maybe a mistake or two that you've seen that people could correct.
Well, I think best strategy, one of the things that's really become important for PR folks and non-PR folks, because again, all these jobs are converging, right? There's lots of people. I personally, and granted I'm biased because I did PR for a long time, I personally feel like PR folks are probably best suited to manage social engagement. But many people who come to social media have zero PR background, so they don't understand how to, deal with crises or mitigate crises or have plans like that, So anyone who doesn't come from PR, if you don't have a crisis communications plan in place for your clients who are operating in social spaces, that's really important. And I think the other thing that all of us are working on right now, and there's some really great new tools out there to help make this easier, is influencer outreach. So PR people have always done influencer outreach, but the nature of influencers is changing. So it used to be the influencers were, journalists, of course, by default, and maybe some other sort of prominent people in your business category or community, depending on, what you're promoting. But now, anyone with a large following can be an influencer. And so, one of the most important parts of all of our jobs is finding out who those people are and engaging with them on a regular basis. And, if they have a large following and they're enthusiastic about what you have, they might be just as important and useful to you in getting the word out as traditional press. And then the last thing I'll say on that is, but make sure you're following the FTC guidelines in that regard. So I'm surprised, those came out in December 2009, and there's still lots and lots of people who don't even know they exist. And so the FTC has very specific guidelines about working with bloggers, and not just bloggers. I mean, they're pretty vague in their language, so it could be anyone with an online presence. Don't be paying or spiffing people for promotional mentions without disclosure, because that's a big no-no and could really turn off your audience if they found out after the fact you were doing that.
Well, Carri, thanks. That your advice to have a plan is excellent. And I know none of you are old enough to remember this, but the very first shuttle disaster that NASA had in the 80s, maybe you were children then.
I remember it well.
They had kind of a disaster in public relations there because they didn't report, and the media couldn't get the full story of what had happened, and were they going to be able to recover them? Was there a chance they were alive, and that sort of thing. Now, can you imagine if fast forward to today's environment and having Twitter and all that, they'd have to get on it, or the story would take its own run and run away from them. And I think that's probably what you were saying. And so I'll go back around, and then I have another question from the stream. But any thoughts on disasters or common mistakes? Pilar, we'll ask you that one.
I think common mistakes is not. I'll give a good example of one of our clients. It was with the Haiti earthquake. Lynn University, and they were just, one thing that they did is they had an online news site. They went to their dark site immediately, and their message they always made sure that they had their message out there on the website, so it was clear and up and out there for their employees and for the media to see. So everyone was clear on the updates of what was going on, and also the employees knew who the proper communications, the people that were sending out the messages, who the spokespeople for the company were.
So, Pilar, on spokespeople, would there be there'd be a real world media spokesperson? There might be a Twitter spokesperson, and then you're saying there's messages
exactly
on the website.
Yes, you have to make sure, when you're dealing with a crisis, you have designated people, you have the face, you have the voice, you have to have that in place, you have to have a plan and have the plan in place and know where to get it so you can execute it when a crisis happens. You make sure it's common sense, but make sure it's not just having it on your computer, but have a printout of it. And of the people, when something happens, they have it close by, because lines can go down, technology can fail, and so you just always need to make sure that you have a plan in place, you have the right people assigned to speak on the behalf of your company, and also to have the right people that can handle the damage control, because sometimes there could be a crisis within a crisis. The wrong person may have spoken to the media. So how to handle that too. It's just so much goes into place with a crisis. But I think Lynn did a great job. They had some crises that had occurred within the whole earthquake and handling of it, miscommunication going out there. That's just a great example of, of how to handle a crisis situation.
Sure, and I think to Carrie's point, they probably had a plan in place, and they had designated people and all of that. Mm-hmm. So Lori, any mistakes that you've seen and thoughts on that?
Sure. Sadly, yes, I have seen some mistakes out there. I guess I'm going to take this a little bit different direction, and instead of discussing a specific mistake I've seen, one thing in general that I see companies doing is that a company that would have spent weeks hammering out a public relations strategy, and this touches a little bit on what Pilar was saying about making sure that you have a crisis communications plan in place. They would, have all these meetings and traditionally put together a public relations strategy and marketing strategy, and everybody was on board, and they would do multi-years, and there would be all the different actions that would relate to the objectives and the goal. Those same companies jump into social media by, well, the boss has a college-age daughter that's really good on social media, so let's hire her part-time, and she can tweet for us. And there's no thought given that what you do in social media and with new media should be tied back to what your overall public relations marketing goals are, and they should be things that you are measuring and that are contributing to your brand in the same way that more traditional public relations activities are. And I think that's something that I see quite a bit. And kind of related to that is I also see companies jumping in and spreading themselves a little too thin, and that is primarily because they don't have that direction that they would with a traditional public relations plan. There's over 100 social media sites, and I swear some companies feel they need to be on everything and everywhere, and
try to be everywhere at once.
Exactly. Like I say, don't try to be everywhere, everything to everyone. It just doesn't make sense. If your clients aren't on Google Plus, then why are you spending time on Google Plus, as an example? So I think that kind of ties in. You can start to monitor that and build your audience, but you need to know where your audience is, and that comes back to just like traditional public relations, knowing those demographics and how best to reach them.
Well, related to what we're saying is, you be careful. Have a plan, have the right person on the right social media. You don't have to be everywhere. But if you Google an event or something you're looking for, certainly since it's Google, they'll return comments that people have made on Google Plus, as well as the news story, as well as the blog post, and they may pick up things from other media as well. And I had a comment in the stream, and then 2 questions, and I'll read them, and then we'll go around. Our hour is going fast; it'll be done soon. I know Wendy will keep us posted on that. But the comment was, unfortunately, PR came to social late, which is why marketing tends to lead social. That was interesting. You may have a thought on that. And then I'll save the last question for the end. But this one is, what about using a 2-paragraph blog announcement instead of a traditional press release? So let's go back to Carri on
well, first of all, I already saw that first comment on Twitter and responded to it on Twitter. I'll tell the crowd here what I said. I disagree. I don't think PR was late to the game at all. I think ad agencies are late to the game. I think You see, Carri's leading already out on social media ahead of our even our live broadcast. So I think PR folks were pretty early to social, as were digital marketers, and not interactive marketers, but SEO folks, because SEO folks are always, if you want to know what's coming, sort of latest greatest in digital, hang with the SEO folks because they're hacking it now, right? But PR people have always been close to the C-suite and really understand messaging and understand, the opportunities and the downsides, the ramifications of dealing with your audience, which people who come from digital marketing that might not have hands-on experience working with people who are pushing back, for example, might not have. So I don't think that PR people were late. But that said, I think in a lot of cases it's better for social to be handled by in-house corporate marketing teams because they are closest to the brand. I mean, I think it all depends, right? It depends on what your message is. For example, if you have a really commodity like a commodity consumer brand, there's only so much you can say about it. Like, what can you say about soda pop, right? Or toothpaste, let's say, for example. But if you have a complicated product with a long sales cycle, for example, or anything that might have, that might cause people to be unhappy. Oops, sorry.
That's all right.
I'm actually not even at my own house. I'm at a friend's apartment in San Francisco because I was at a conference all day yesterday. So my apologies. I didn't know how to turn.
That's all right. Well, we're in the 20 teens now. So and that leads me to want to remind everybody that Pilar is from BusinessWire. She's coming to us courtesy of her phone, but she's not able to get that lower third bar there that says where she's from. So we're all doing different technologies. Sometimes it bumps any one of us, but we're doing pretty good. I wanted to come back to you, Pilar, on and kind of tie it into what Carri was just saying about professionals and something you said earlier about having the official information page at a website. And that question, what about a 2-paragraph blog announcement instead of traditional press release? Well, how do you set things up? What would you say, so they know where the official announcement is and where to look for it?
See, that's the whole thing. You could make a blog announcement, but the key is who's your audience? If your audience is a very small group that really have no relevance to your story or not going to affect your story or your post at all, it's not going to reach the right hands, then it's not very effective. You really need to make sure you're not excluding anyone. And so that's the thing. When you rely on a single source, you're really taking some risk. So you really need to make sure. It depends. Like, I know Carri had mentioned this before, and so did Lori. You have to make sure that you your audience is the right audience, and it's reaching the right hands. You have to take into consideration the company. Are you a small company or you're a public company? And your reach. You know, I think the best thing is just making sure you reach everyone and you go everywhere simultaneously if you're a big company. And you know, you also want to make sure if it's going to go into the blogger's hands that blogger's page is reaching the right people.
Well, all three of you have stressed reaching the right audience and the right people and kind of targeting when you can. And there's different ways to do that in social media, as we know, and in content marketing too. And Pilar sent me an article on content marketing yesterday and public relations, and there's some overlap in that. But I got another question that's a little bit long. I want to make sure you all get a chance to comment on it. We got about 8 minutes left. I'll read it. Then, since I'm with Pilar now, I'll go Pilar, then Lori, then Carri, and then any closing thoughts. So the question is, in a study Vocus and Inc. magazine reported that social media marketing is being used by 77.3% of small and medium-sized businesses. And almost 1/4 rated it as one of the top 3 most effective tools for their marketing trends. Are these statistics surprising to you? Do you find them higher than expected? So go back to your thoughts on that, Pilar.
Well, you know what? It's not surprising. Today, you know, I just read this. Today, all brands are publishers. If Facebook or Twitter presence, then they need content to populate. It makes sense, these platforms. So the standard content marketing execution includes blogs. It includes print magazines, companion websites, e-newsletters, webinars, postings to mass social media platforms. So it's not surprising. You know, it's just encompassing everything. And what you're finding is everyone is partaking in content marketing, and they're using social media to do it. But I think you got to do everything. It's not one thing or the other. You got to make sure you're covering all your platforms. You're using traditional, and you're also using social media. I think with that you have a good mix.
Yeah. So Lori, 77% of people using social media, and we're talking content marketing. We had the earlier question about marketers leading out ahead of public relations. How do you separate the two? Are they one and the same thing, or would you have any thought, maybe quickly? The question was, does the number 77% surprise you? And then, what's marketing versus what's public relations?
Well, I'm not surprised by the 70% figure. I think as you look at the different vehicles that we fold into being called social media, and then tie that back to some of the content things we do, whether it's custom publishing, company blogs, those sorts of things that tie in so well with social media. I think that's what's helping to sort of drive the satisfaction with incorporating social media into PR and marketing. And I'm sorry, the second part of the question was? Well,
just you know, is there a dividing line? And then our hour has gone fast, and I'll ask Carri this too. But is there a dividing line between social media marketing and public relations, or is it one and the same thing?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, let's go to Carri on that one.
Okay. I say it all depends. They could be the same, but they could be kind of different. You know, kind of depends on what your social media marketing consists of. You know, lots of social media marketing includes developing, you know, visuals and video and digital assets, stuff that is traditionally the purview of ad agencies, and lots of social media marketing doesn't. I mean, it's just all about messaging and connecting with influencers and you know, journalists and your target audiences. So I think it depends on, you know, what you're trying to accomplish, what you're promoting. But, you know, to my point earlier, I think it's all converging. You know, it's I would say anyone who wants job security going forward, don't put yourself in a silo. Have a lot of skill sets. Be able to do a lot of different things, because I think that is absolutely, I think in a few years we'll have different kinds of categories for marketing activities. I've heard a lot of people say they do PR and they don't do anything that I think of as PR. So, people are putting their own spin on that.
Maybe this ties into that point, but I noticed in your byline there that you put up on the screen, the social TV strategist.
Yeah.
So it's social and PR and marketing all rolled into one when you do that?
No, so the social TV strategy is a little bit different. So I write a column about social TV, and that can include, software, hardware, marketing strategies, second screen stuff for a magazine called Social Media Monthly. And I also attend a lot of conferences, which is why I'm in San Francisco right now. I was just at a conference yesterday called The TV of Tomorrow, which is a fantastic event. And, to your original question, when you start talking to people predicting what's going to happen in the future and you sort of see where the technology is going, I really think that those things are going to blur, because our concept of TV won't even be what it is now. So we're going to be creating all these new channels and ways for marketers to reach their audiences, that we don't even have right now, but we have a bunch of tools right now that we didn't have 5 years ago, right? So
sure. We'll all be on like this and some evolution of this, I guess.
Absolutely. So, if you're staying abreast of what's coming down the pike, I think that there's going to be a multitude of ways to reach your audience with your message. And I think one of the things that PR people should be aware of, and then I'll shut up because I think I've probably talked too long, is that people are so bombarded with marketing messages these days, and we always have been, but it just continues to escalate. Is that weaving your message into something that's entertaining is becoming more and more important.
I was going to go to Lori because she's Lori Weaver, and you just said weaving, and then I saw the technology.
I know she bumped.
The technology wove her right out. But Pilar, you've been successfully staying on without getting bumped. So, any final thoughts and something you might want to tell us about BusinessWire and what it does with social media and where you're going along those lines?
Well, one of the things with social media is that, with BusinessWire, we embrace social media. And in fact, we offer 61 industry Twitter feeds, just as an example. And we have sharing links for social media on each piece of our content, and we optimize our content.
So
for
Pilar, when you say 61 feeds, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupting your thought, but that was interesting to me. I didn't know that. Why 61? Are they segmented or targeted?
Exactly. They are segmented. They're targeted. So it could be, for instance, we have one for health. We have one for politics. We have one for instance, My Latino Wire, the Latino Wire brand that we have. So we have the general business Twitter handle, and then we have the other brand for the different news contents and keywords that we offer. So that's something that, and we optimize, the content and the handles that we have for the different various search engines to make it easier for our audiences to engage on our platforms that they choose.
Well, that's perfect. Unfortunately, Lori got bumped. If she comes back in, we'll thank her. But I think we covered a lot of ground, and the hour went fast. And it is 11 o'clock straight up. I will ask you, either of you, if you have a final comment, and then we'll wrap it up so you can get on to all the other things you're doing. Carri, you're on the road, and you were at an interesting conference. Anything you want to say about that, or any last question or comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gosh, my mind was blown yesterday by all the, what's coming down the pike. I think basically, we think right now that media is everywhere, but it's really going to be everywhere. And I think one of the things that PR people could be thinking about is...
Carrie, it's going to be in our glasses, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's going to be more than that. I think one of the things we can be thinking about is probably the ramifications to privacy and how much people might push back against that or not. You know, we don't know. I mean, certainly that seems to be somewhat related to age and what you're comfortable with and what you're used to. But, you know, your TV is going to start watching you very soon. I mean, that's
well, I want to just say hi to the NSA in case they're watching today. So welcome to the broadcast, NSA, and all of you guys. So Pilar, any last thing you'd like to remind people about BusinessWire, or any last thoughts?
Well, I would just say, in general, today's PR, just again, I just want to reiterate to really know who you are by doing some good soul searching again. Build your own brand and know your audience. I think we have stressed that, and keep up with the times. But if you do use new technology, as Lori had mentioned before, make sure that that new technology is where your audience is going to be, and that they're using that. And it's effective for you.
And knowing your audience is an excellent point, because not only that, but let's say you're going to a traditional journalist or even a popular blog spot online. Know their audience so that you could tell that you can pitch a story that's ideal for their audience. For instance, we have a client, and he may be watching. If you are, hi Nick. That he has different audiences within a hospital. Because their product works for decision makers that may be the chief technology officer, it may be the chief financial officer, and they have different publications for each of those different target audiences. And so you could. I was telling him the other day, we were talking about this. You could shift and maybe strike a different angle when you write a proposal or a pitch for the different publications. And Lori, you came back just in time for us to go back to you, and we've just exceeded our hour by a little bit, so we'll let you have any final thoughts about anything you want to say about what the next things that Lexington Business Media is doing along the whole line of social media and public relations.
I guess, the only thing that I would mention in parting here is that what my focus has been on with Lexington Business Media is to help companies to build content that's relevant and that's timely, that's well written and helps to contribute to their brand, and to use social media to their advantage in bringing clients, customers to that content. And so that's they tie very closely together. I think right before I got bumped off, we were talking about how social media and public relations and marketing are all really kind of coming together in ways that they hadn't in the past.
Yep. Well, I don't want to keep. You've all been great, and I thank all of our panelists, and I thank our stream team who's been capturing the questions. We are going to award a prize for best questions, prize or 2 or 3, in fact, and we'll just reach out to you by email and send you either an ebook or a free online course. And I want to thank you all and not keep you on the hook any longer. A lot of great topics. I still have to go back and watch just to remember them all and kind of list them. Thanks so much, Carri, Lori, and Pilar, and we'll just wave goodbye and end our broadcast now, but I thank you.
Bye.
All right, thanks, guys, very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.